Hi, my name is Nati, and I'm super excited to be presenting for the Global Power Platform Bootcamp 2023 this year. Unfortunately, I'm going to be doing this virtually as I'm pretty far from where the location is and of the time difference as well. But hopefully you can review this and you can be in touch with me afterwards to discuss it if need be. So before we go any further, we just want to give a big shout out and thank you to all of those involved with making this event happen, as well as all the sponsors. Without you, we wouldn't have these global boot camps. So big shout out and thank you very, very much. As I said, my name is Nati. I am currently a solutions lead for a company based in the UK called Cloud2. I actually live in Cape Town, South Africa, so you see it's pretty far away from where I'm presenting now. I've been developing in the Power Platform for over 6 years now. And the reason why I've got such a passion for the Power Platform is I enjoy building complex solutions using the low-code tools within the platform to achieve process automation and efficiency within clients' perspectives and within their processes. So it's kind of making their day-to-day activities a lot simpler. At the same time, just a bit extra about me, I enjoy all other sorts of technology such as Raspberry Pis and home automation, and also enjoy going for walks on the beach with my dog, going to the gym, taking care of my family. Family time is very important to me. So that's a bit about me. Let's dive into the presentation. So today we're going to be speaking on ALM itself, and the agenda is going to focus on the basics of ALM. What is application lifecycle management? We're then going to break it down into the governance component, and we're going to go through the different components within ALM and see how we can start building that governance framework. Following by that, we're going to look at a few resources for where you can start getting started building your ALM framework, such as resources, pre-built templates, tools online, etc. And then we can follow up our Q&A session, which unfortunately I'm not going to be able to attend live. But if you do have any questions, feel free to pop me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter, and we can have chats then. So diving into our first topic, what is ALM, Application Lifecycle Management? ALM consists of quite a few processes within it. So starting off, we have got being able to identify required projects, where we can prioritize what projects need to come first, by identifying how long they're going to take, how hard they're going to be to develop, what the company needs, what's internal development versus what's client-facing development. We can also then identify what capacity we have to take on certain projects and determine lead times through that. So for instance, we've got 2 developers both working at 80% capacity. It's going to be very difficult to promise a client a solution in 2 weeks' time. And then it's also being able to manage these projects through some sort of tools such as DevOps, where we can manage our projects, manage our lead times, have a single document, a source of documentation, and manage our deployment phases and our sprints and so forth. Going a bit more into the actual development side of it, we can also identify an environment strategy in terms of where we're going to be developing our solutions, such as having a development environment, a quality assurance, a UAT, and a production environment, and determining how we get from the development environment to our production environment. At the same time, during that development phase, we also need some sort of structured guidelines to accommodate how we develop in terms of naming conventions, accessibility standards, and this is what we'll discuss with development standards and having that structured standards in place that needs to be adhered to. Going a bit more into our pipelines and deployments, we can also focus a bit on version control and source control, having some sort of tool like DevOps or GitHub to ensure that we've got repositories, having a single source of truth for our code, having deployment pipelines and release plans to ensure we can migrate our solutions from point A to point B effectively, and ensuring we've got some sort of stable version control across those deployment phases. And going alongside with those deployment phases, we also need to ensure that we're deploying quality solutions. So we need to undergo quality reviews, peer reviews, and so forth, where we have checklists that we can go and double check our development standards have been adhered to within our solutions. And then lastly, we're going to touch base on a bit of maintenance in terms of how we can archive prod solutions, how we accommodate change requests in terms of being able to apply changes or fixes on a production application without affecting it sitting in prod. So going back to our development environments, how we roll back solutions, and how we monitor them to ensure that they're at their utmost optimized performance. So going into ALM components on itself, Microsoft documentation clearly states we've got 3 primary components of ALM. We've got our governance component, which is what we're going to be discussing today. This consists of having your management in place, your development standards, your security, having database audits, your reviews, your deployment phases, all that type of stuff, which is what we're going to discuss now. Then we've got our application development, which focuses more on the actual stage of development. This is where usually your application developer will sit. They'll be doing the designs, the development, the build, the test, all within this number 2 component. And then lastly, we've got the maintenance side of things, where we can actually apply and deploy our developments, where we can apply rollbacks if needed, take on change requests, and implement any performance enhancements that are needed. So let's touch base on building a governance framework. As I said, the governance framework consists of quite a few components, and you can see we've got structured resource planning, documentation, environment strategy, etc. But let's dive into each one pretty specifically. So with structured resource planning, we were talking about how we take on projects, identifying what's client-facing, what is internal-facing, and how we can identify what is priority versus what's not priority. We can then allocate these to specific resources in our organization. And I'm just going to pause for a second and project lead times as well for these projects. Going a bit more into the document development standards, it's identifying how we're going to set up these standards in terms of naming conventions, accessibility standards, code commenting, and so forth. That's all going to fall under scope of standards. Environment strategies, very simple. We're going to focus on it on a specific environment build, having a dev environment, a QA, UAT, and a production environment. Going into source control versioning, such as using tools like DevOps, GitHub, to have one single source of truth for your code and have a structured version control across all your other environments. We're going to also dive into a bit of QA alongside peer review to understand how we can initialize QA and peer reviews, what needs to be done, checklists, and how we resolve issues within that QA phase. We're also going to discuss it briefly about security compliance, ensuring that you've got NDAs in place if you're dealing with customer data. Users and developers have the appropriate access to build their solutions, and then ensuring that our data is stored securely and we've got active aligned DLPs in place. And lastly, we're going to see how we can deal with change requests. So when the customer submits a change request, where we go from there, if it's viable, if it's not viable, and a process involving how we actually do rollbacks and apply those changes. So let's start off with our resource planning. Within our resource planning and management, let's say we have got quite a few solutions that are on the pipeline. This we're going to talk about internal planning and internal development right now. So we've got an inventory management system, manufacturing system, report feature request, KPI submission, and innovation tracker. These are all solutions that the company wants now, but there's only so much that we can build in our time. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to put them aside and place them on a resource matrix grid. And we can place them based on a few different metrics. On our y-axis, we have got how difficult it is to build this type of solution in terms of how complex it is. And on our x-axis, we're going to be able to determine how long this development is going to take. So if we look at our first one, our KPI submission app, we can see that it's relatively the easiest and the quickest solution to build. Whereas our manufacturing system is a lot more on the top right corner, making it a lot longer and more complex to build. Now, at the same time, we also need to prioritize what solutions the company needs as soon as possible. And that's where we're going to enlarge these solutions over here. So we've placed them on our matrix, but we also determine priority based on the size of them. So our innovation tracker, the little red one in the middle, is not so crucial, but our manufacturing system is absolutely crucial and is needed right now. Whereas our KPI submission is kind of in between. It's after the report feature request app, but it's above the innovation tracker and the inventory management solution. So we can get an idea from this that the two solutions that we need to focus on right now is our manufacturing system because it's highest priority, as well as our KPI submission because it's in the middle and we can actually attend to it quickly and get it rolled out very, very quickly. But now how do we assign it to our resources? So we've got two developers. We've got Lucy and Brad. Lucy is currently working at 60% of capacity, so the amount of work that she has on hand leaves her with 40% available to do other work, whereas Brad is a lot more filled up and he's utilizing 80% of his capacity at the moment. So we can assign our solutions accordingly, knowing that our manufacturing system, which is a lot more complex and will take quite a bit more time, can go to Lucy because she's got the capacity available, whereas Brad, he's got a bit less capacity. He can focus on the smaller, easier application, and we can try to get it out sooner because it's a lot simpler and it's not taking up too much of his time. Let's touch base on development standards. Well, development standards consist of quite a number of components. We can discuss naming convention. Naming convention consists of a variety within itself as well. We've got having page names within Canvas apps. We've got having control names within model-driven apps, Canvas apps, entity names within Dataverse, within Power Virtual Agents, and so forth. It's identifying how we're going to name these structures. For instance, if you're going to have a page name within a Canvas app, do you want to have a space in the page name, i.e. calling it home page versus home underscore page, or home page as one word? Are you going to follow some sort of Pascal or camel case naming procedure for those items as well? We're looking at page controls, such as drop downs, text inputs, date pickers, etc. How are we going to differentiate between what component is what? Are we going to use abbreviations such as TXT for text inputs, or LBL for labels? And with that abbreviation, how do we identify where it's sitting in terms of what page it's sitting on and what its actual function is? So we could have a label on our home page that says welcome so-and-so, and that label can be called LBL underscore homepage underscore logged in user. It gives us a really nice idea of what that label actually does. At the same time, we can also understand how we're going to be dealing with spaces. Do we want spaces in our solution in columns and in data sources? Absolutely not. I personally hate having to put those two little commas around all my column names. So I personally either replace them with underscores or use a camel case or Pascal case naming convention around that. At the same time, we also need to understand delegation warnings in terms of being able to use our solution efficiently. So it's including local collections, how we import them, where we import them, are we going to use the onStart property, and so forth. And we're going to use named functions in our solution as well. And then we're going to touch base on variables. So branching away from our Canvas apps only, we can differentiate between local and global variables within Canvas apps. We can just use vars for variable names in Power Automate flows. And what about on desktop flows? We're going to be using input and output variables. How do we differentiate between those type of variables as well? So that's very important to note down. If you're calling desktop flows or cloud flows together. Trigger names is a big one. It's not something I focus on quite a bit so much, but it's also very, very important to understand if you've got some sort of an application that's going to be calling a Power Automate flow and it's going to be a trigger. We've got a trigger name called Power Apps or Schedule, but how do we know what that trigger's purpose is? Do we know what's calling it, when it's meant to occur, and so forth? And that also applies to action names. We can utilize the action names for Power Automate flows as they come along, but as you add the same one over and over again, you're going to start getting duplicates, and that's where your naming convention is going to go out, because you're going to start getting create item 1, create item 2. So how do we differentiate between create item? I need to create this invoice in this library over here, and I need to create this ledger in this library over here, and so forth. In terms of Dataverse and our data sources, we touch base on it again with column names. Are we going to have spaces in our column names? Me personally, I do not like it. And then how are we going to name our overall solution if we are building an entire solution? So that all falls under the naming convention standards within development standards. Touching base on a bit of code structure. How do we optimize our code to be as efficient as possible? And included in that is making it readable and understandable. Are we going to format it within our apps? And are we going to comment it? I've had plenty of situations where I've been looking at code in some applications, and there's been 60, 100 lines of code there, not formatted, or if it is formatted, without any comments in it. So I have no idea what every line of code is actually doing. So commenting your code is something you seriously need to consider within your development standards. Theme control is a really nice one these days, and we can apply it through multiple factors within the Power Platform. We can initialize theme variables within Canvas apps, and it allows us to reuse those variables and theme controls throughout our application. And we can also use CSS files within, such as Power Pages. And the beauty about having a theme control is that we can load it locally. We can utilize it throughout our entire application without having to worry about colors being off or separate from each other. And at the same time, if we do want to make a change to either a font size, a font, or a color, we can change it in a single location, and we can know that it will carry out throughout our entire solution. Let's talk about delegation avoidance. How do we avoid delegation warnings? Are we loading our content into local collections? Are we using online versus offline loading capacities? And how are we dealing with data limits? That's also something we need to consider with development standards. Are we going to be filtering collections based on what we need for a specific function? Or are we going to first bring in a collection and filter afterwards? There's those type of aspects that we need to think about. With accessibility, right now we also need to ensure that our application can be used with screen readers. We've got tooltips, and our accessibility labels actually identify to what the purpose of that component or label actually does. So that's also very important to ensure that our solution is accessible to those that kind of need it. And a really big one is error handling. We need to be able to keep our solution alive if it crashes. And what I mean with that is for instance, we've got a Power Automate flow that's going to retrieve information from one database and bring it into another table. If that schema in our primary database changes and our flow breaks, how can we ensure our solution is still functioning with possibly stale data, but not failing continuously? So it's having error handling in there, notifying stakeholders when something does break, having loops, avoiding fail flows, and having your own audit table for fail flows if they do fail, because the Power Automate audit log only lasts 28 days. So we want some sort of our own audit log as well to ensure that we can always maintain those type of errors. Diving into security, we can discuss how we want to apply security roles and who we want to apply them to. Do we want to incorporate environment teams, security hierarchy to specific data roles? Are we going to incorporate data limitations? And how do we deal with customers' data sitting in our environments or their environments that we're accessing? Do we have NDAs in place? And the same can apply with data policies, with DLPs. Are we applying them at an org level? Who are we applying them to? Can we transfer information across different environments? And are we restricting or limiting specific connectors or custom connectors that may need to be used within custom development? Going into performance alignment, though, we can also monitor our solution to ensure that we haven't got any unused variables, unused media controls, and ensure that we've got no unneeded delays. Because that's a big one. You don't want to be sitting on a loading screen for so long with a ton of back-end data being loaded. It's not necessary. You want to ensure that your solution can go from screen A to screen B, or from point A to point B effectively and efficiently. And then lastly, branding guidelines. It can fit in a bit with theme control, but it's more specific to either your company's or client-facing branding guidelines, ensuring that your solutions all match. The last thing you want is having a management solution for KPI that looks like it's got a blue, orange, and green theme, and then you've got an inventory management system that's got red, black, and blue. The two don't tie up. And if your logos are purple, green, and pink, none of those solutions tie up with your branding guidelines. So it's ensuring that you've got some specific branding guidelines to match your requirements or to incorporate client development. So let's quickly touch base on a bit of bad development standards. So this is some screenshots I've taken from some bad solutions I personally have developed back in the day. It was my starting point. Starting with our first one, with our Power Automate flows, we've got a Power Apps trigger. Now, we don't know what's triggering this flow now, because all our triggers called is Power Apps. Do we know if it's being triggered by a button, what that button's going to be doing? It's send an invoice, create a customer, and so forth. And then following that, we've got a whole bunch of create files this, create file that, send email. There's no clarity in terms of what each action does. Looking more over to the right-hand side within a Canvas app, we've got all our controls on our screen. We've got a bit more naming convention in terms of BTN stands for button and back. We know that what it does, but where is that button sitting? Is it sitting on a home page, on a landing page, on a transactional page? And what does _5 mean? Where are the other 4? Which one is this one? If you get what I'm saying, we don't actually understand which button means what. And then looking below, we've got a bit of code there. Our collections, that's not formatted. We can see we're collecting a quotation into a quotation database, but our titles and our fields that we're going to be importing is CH_name_1. We have no idea what that is. There's no formatting. There's no commenting. It's very hard to actually read it. Not this complex, but if you can see what I mean, it's not what it should be. Now, but on the good side of development standards, we've got the exact same process with our Power Automate flow, sorry, something in my throat, where when we say create a file in OneDrive, what's that action doing? Okay, well, we're creating our invoice in a OneDrive invoice folder. And when we're converting our HTML PDF, we're changing our invoice HTML into a PDF file. We're creating the file in an invoice library in SharePoint, and we're updating the properties at the bottom to show that the invoice has been sent and the details reflect as sent. So we've got a bit more clarity in terms of what each action does. So if there's a fail one day saying, okay, well, why didn't the flow update the invoice to show sent? I know exactly where to look first time round. Looking into the middle with our code, we can see we've got it a bit more structured, a bit more formatted, and we've got comments above every single clear collect, so we know exactly what we're collecting, and we're ensuring that all our data is stored locally in stable and refined collections. And then going more onto the right-hand side within our Canvas app, we've kind of split out exactly what our controls are going to be. So we've applied our abbreviated naming convention for buttons, for labels, etc. We've placed underscores between the abbreviation and the location as to where it's sitting. So for instance, CMP underscore homepage. And we've provided another underscore following what the description is going to do. So CMP component underscore homepage, where we are, underscore navigation, that's our navigation component. So we've made our solution a lot more readable should we need to come back and apply updates or fix it. Let's discuss a bit of environment strategy right now. So environment strategy can vary amongst your requirements. Microsoft have documented that they like a specific environment strategy, and this is the type of environments that they associate with the ALM Accelerator, where we can start with a development environment, a quality assurance environment, a UAT, and a production environment. And some people call development environment a sandbox. In your Power Platform Admin Center, when you create a new environment, you can differentiate between developer environments or a sandbox as well. But ideally, this is a 4-tier structure that you want to deal with. And how you want to tackle it is you want to ideally create your solutions. This is where all your development will take place, in your developer environment, your sandbox environment, and you'll start developing as an unmanaged solution. When you're ready to continue with your deployment process and go into a QA phase, you then deploy your solution as a managed solution into your QA environment, undergo all your QA peer reviews that are necessary for that specific stage. And then when ready, if it passes, go into your UAT where you apply your testings. And the same thing, once you've completed your UAT, you go into your production as a managed environment, and this will hit your end users where they'll finally use that managed solution in that product environment. And we're ensuring that we're keeping a stable version control, version 1.1, across dev, QA, UAT, and prod the entire time. So should an issue arise in our production environment of version 1.1, we can go back to our development environment, initiate version 1.2, but without affecting our end users utilizing our solution in production environments. We can also scale our environment strategy to be a bit more complex in terms of having these 4 primary these environments, but in different regions. So for instance, you've got a tenant that's got various companies. You've got an organization in the United Kingdom, in South Africa, in Canada. You can apply these environment strategies to every single organization. And you can take it a step further and even apply them to different departments as well. So you've always got that ability. Let's touch base on source controls. I've got a nice little picture here of DevOps. I took it from my website. I've got a source thing over there. But source control is also very crucial if you're dealing with a bit of pro code utilities, if you're using PCF controls, if you're dealing with Power Pages, you've got CSS files and so forth. And if you want to incorporate collaboration, source control is really effective. You can use tools such as DevOps, Bitbucket, Atlassian, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, GitHub, etc. And you can utilize quite a lot of the DevOps tools, such as your Azure DevOps repositories. And this is where your source control comes into play. You've got one source, one single source of truth sitting in your Azure repo in your main branch. And then you can ensure that you can branch out to other branches later on, so you can actively collaborate and develop within your solution, knowing that if you do have an issue, you can always roll back to a previous branch or previous stage and have that sort of structure and validation in place at the same time. You can also utilize stuff like pipelines and boards to have your user stories and link bugs to those user stories, link branches to those user stories, and deploy and unpack your solutions into these repositories using your pipelines. So source control plays a major role within your ALM process. But to break down a really basic source control, we're going to use a DevOps project where we've got our project file solution living in DevOps. For that project, we are going to have our main branch. That's where our production code sits for the application sitting in production. But at the same time, we want to be able to build a version 1.2 later on. So we'll have our test branch as well, which will undergo the testing when needed. But working off those branches, we'll have both Lucy and Brad using their own developer branches that when ready, they can collaborate and do whatever they want in their own branch, but they can then deploy and merge into the test branch when they are ready. We can ensure that there's no conflicts, we can complete the merge, and we can push it straight to main to ensure that version 1.2 now has now been consolidated into a single branch and deployed successfully into main, mitigating any conflicts, mitigating any bugs or issues, or hopefully bugs, and ensuring that both Lucy's dev and Brad's dev can come together in our solution. So we know who the code belongs to, we know that there are no conflicts, we can combine them, we've got our single source of truth as well, and we can utilize collaboration at its finest. Touching base a bit on the peer review. So peer review can consist of, or we call it quality assurance as well, can consist of a process where you've outlined what you're looking to check within your solution. So we've got our various stages of our QA or peer reviews where we're going to be planning how we're going to tackle our quality assurance, applying those QAs, reviewing whether our QA is viable or not, and then evaluating the next steps, whether we need to proceed to repeat a QA or we're going to go through to UAT. So with planning our QA starter pack is we're going to have a structured QA process. We're going to understand what we're going to be looking for in our QA sessions. Are we going to be looking at naming conventions? Are we going to be looking at our development standards? Are we going to be looking at optimization, performance, and so forth? And alongside with that, we're going to have our QA checklist based on those processes, and we can know who we're going to assign it to. So we're going to assign this QA session to another developer who hasn't had the chance to look at the solution. We're bringing in a nice set of fresh eyes, someone to really target your code and ensure that it's at its finest. The next step would be actually applying that QA process, where we'd have that QA checklist that go into your solution, and based on whatever standards or processes you have in place, they'll go, okay, well, you haven't matched this naming convention, so I'm going to mark that as a 1 out of 3. You haven't accounted for accessibility labels. You have done for some, but not for others. Okay, I'll give it a 2 out of 3. Your code's nicely formatted and you've commented all of it. Great, that's a 3 out of 3. And you can kind of score it in terms of that aspect and have a total tally afterwards to see, okay, well, my expectation is to have a 3 out of 3 for the perfect solution, but I've only achieved a 2 out of 3 for one item, and I've got 30 items on our list. Okay, so I need to tally a total of 90, but I only got 70. Is that efficient or not? Is that within our standards? Is that the quality we want to present? That's kind of where the process will fall into place. Do you want it to have a 60 out of 90 standard, a 70 out of 90 standard? And that's where we'll be able to review it. Has our solution passed our standards? So we've graded our solution. We've achieved a 75 out of 90 score rating for what are different factors. Is it a pass or no? In my environment, absolutely not. I want mine to be at a minimum of an 80-85. So if that's the case, our QA will go back as QA failed. We'll go back into our development environment. We'd apply the changes accordingly and reinitiate our QA stage where we can again complete the QA checklist in our process and hopefully achieve an 85-90 scoring for our entire solution. If we do, we can evaluate, has our assessment been passed? Yes or no? Yes, it has been passed. Let's complete our QA phase and now deploy to our test environment. Diving into our testing phase, I'm more focusing specifically on utilizing user stories from our project management point of view. So if we're utilizing something like DevOps, we can run user stories for our test plans. Now, there are also various ways we can tackle testing. We can tackle testing from internal testing, having our internal users test a solution, manual testing in line with that, manually going through the solution, testing, manual automation, that type of stuff. We can have flows that auto-test our solution, so run it through a specific set of parameters and steps, and if those steps are met, does the solution pass or not, or through automation. And also having some sort of UAT process for stakeholders, for them to run the solution in their environment, test and capture bugs or issues alongside their UAT process. So going through our user stories, let's envision we've got an inventory application. In our user story, we've got something stating that only a manager needs to be able to create a new stock item. Okay, great. So we can create a test plan and test case based off, okay, I need to check that this manager can create the stock item. So based on that test case, we've got steps and parameters. How do we get to create a new stock code? So we go into our inventory app, we open create new stock code, and you can complete the required fields or the additional parameters in there. Are there validations in place and so forth, such as do we need to put in SKUs, a segmented inventory? Do we need to clarify whether it's a specific color or size, and what happens if that color doesn't exist within that drop down? Those are the types of parameters that we need to identify. What happens if you want to submit and create this item but you've left out a color or a size for that item? Do you want to put a little notification there saying you cannot submit until this field's been completed? Have you got that type of validation in there as well, and so forth? So we need to be able to check that against our test case, and we can then determine whether that test case has been passed. If, i.e., it hasn't been passed and there's a bug, we can then take our result, raise a bug against our existing user story, saying, well, when he tried to create this SKU, it let him create it without having a color or a size in it, which is not what we need. We need that validation. Or he can say, I also want to add in a category, what the item falls under. So that is a new feature. So we can raise a feature against that user story as well. And when we're ready to say that we've completed our testing and all our results have been successfully passed, we can then deploy into a production environment, hopefully. So let's talk about release and version control now. So following our defined environment strategy, where we've got our developer or sandbox environment going into our QA, UAT, and production environment, we need to ensure that we can deploy a version 1.1 or 1.0 across all these environments effectively and efficiently. So if we're working within a Power Platform environment using something like DevOps for our deployment pipelines, we can have our unmanaged solution as version 1.1 sitting in our development environment. That's where we're building the solution. When we're ready, we can use either the CLIs or our pipelines to unpack our solution into our source control in our DevOps project, and we can use our pipeline to do that as well. And when we're ready to commit it, we'll then deploy to our QA environment. And what that will do is it will merge our branches into a QA branch as well. It will use our pipelines to then, if needed, deploy our solution across our specific environments as well and notify the appropriate people, ultimately letting us have our ultimately having our managed solution now as version 1.1 in our QA environment, where we can now undergo our QA process that we just previously talked about. And then the same would apply is when we're ready to go through to our user acceptance testing. Our QA process has been confirmed as we've successfully passed QA and peer reviews. We can do the same thing. We can deploy to a UAT where we would commit and merge our code into a branch within our UAT branch. And using the pipelines, we can also successfully deploy our solution to the relative environment as a managed solution. And lastly, the exact same thing is going to apply for production, where we can deploy our solution and unpack it through the CLI into our main branch, do the mergers accordingly, and use our pipelines to deploy as a managed solution into version 1.1. And we can always go back with release control back to our development environment, as we touched base on, and start at version 1.2 and follow the exact same steps to get to production again. This is a very simple breakdown of how we can deploy across environments, and it kind of follows the steps outlined in the ALM Accelerator that Microsoft offered. But we can also utilize Power Platform pipelines, which is a preview feature, to get from development to prod, following some sort of deployment structure, ensuring we've got a solution artifact stored in Dataverse and some sort of guidance as to how we want to deploy across our various environments. Okay, let's pause for a second. Awesomeness. Let's touch base now on change requests. So I haven't made this one as fancy, but it's a lot of information on the screen. But we've deployed a solution to a customer now, and they love it, but they want a few changes. So the first step is the customer initiates the change request. They're not happy about something. They want something fixed. They want a new feature implemented. They want a phase 2 maybe. They want to actually look into enhancing the solution. So that request comes into our project manager, who will review the request and determine if it's viable or not. And what do we mean by viable? If the change falls within scope of our active project, if it doesn't require another workshop to identify what this request is, if it's something that the team can accomplish very easily during development and it doesn't impact our solution, we'll touch on it now, we can then say it's viable. If it's not viable, i.e. it falls out of scope of the project, you want in your inventory app to be able to also transfer stock between warehouses. That kind of falls out of scope of the project. That needs to be a new project now. It can't really be done in time for your release dates, or it's maybe something that this team can't do. You need a .NET team or a Power Platform team. And it also requires further workshops to understand what type of warehouses you have in place. That's not viable right now. So we can then send it through back to the customer, say, do you want to initiate a phase 2 with this change request? And they can then decide whether we can go forth or not. Otherwise, it's going to say, close request, it's been rejected. So if we are viable, we can say, does it impact our project in terms of how does it impact our timelines? Does it impact the data that we're working with? Is it a major impact or minor impact? So if it is a major impact, it means we need to relook at the design aspect of a solution, or we need to take some data offline for a bit. We need to notify the customer saying this is what the impact's going to be on the solution. Do you approve it or not? If they don't, close the request. If they do, we can bring that through to the developer and say, great, here's a user story, complete this change request. Otherwise, if it doesn't impact, if it's a minor impact on our production solution, we can go straight through the developer and say, apply these changes and so forth. And the great thing is, through this process, we can all create new user stories, link the bugs or the features to these user stories, and utilize our repositories with branches to ensure that we can accommodate these change requests accordingly and then merge them into the correct branch later on. Let's pause for a second. Great. So when applying changes, especially through solutions in Power Platform, we can tackle it from 4 different ways. When we import a solution, you've got the ability to update, to patch, and to upgrade. When you're updating a solution, it technically overwrites the entire solution. It applies the updates. It doesn't add any solution layers to the new solution. And if you had removed any controls or objects within your previous, within your new version of your solution, it will not remove those components. So it cannot remove those. Whereas a patch is something which an upgrade now can technically do, and Microsoft are kind of pointing more towards it. The upgrade function is intelligent enough to apply patches, but it only changes a specific piece of the solution, and it can't delete components within the solution as well. So if you want to import a patch update which removes a column in a specific table, it won't be able to delete that column within the solution. The other downside about running patches is that also you run into a lot of errors constantly, where you're missing components, you're missing objects, all these issues. It's not fun. The more appropriate change at the moment, which the ALM Accelerator is also governing towards now, is the upgrade function. And what this does is it creates a new solution layer on top of your existing solution. It can remove dependencies and objects based on your new solution from your previous solution. And it will also remove any existing patch layers as well. And that's the safest way currently to upgrade your solutions from version 1 to version 1.2 or so forth. Another way to deal with upgrades is use segmented solutions. What I mean by segmented is having separate solutions for different parts of a bigger solution. So instead of having 100 different objects in a single solution, you can break that up similar to the COE starter kit. You've got your core components as one solution. You've got your innovation solution as one. You've got your ALM Accelerator as another. You're segmenting your primary COE as separate apps and solutions within your environment, which is another way to do it. And that's also great for accommodating stuff like hotfixes as well. So now that we've identified the different components within a governance framework and what needs to be included within your governance framework, how can we get started with it, and what tools do we need? So following a basic guideline, we know it all works together. It's all cogs within a system. Our capacity management lets us understand how we're going to manage our team, take on projects, and will lead us to, well, we've taken on this project now, but how do we identify our standards? We need to develop in this certain way. We need to adhere to these different standards. And we can do that by using DevOps tools, using repositories, using user stories, using release plans, and following that structure, going into quality assurance, having some sort of app to monitor, to check our solutions during these phases, to notify the people when they have failed, when they have been checked, to apply comments or feedback during these QA sessions. And how do we share the solutions with these people at the same time? If you want to accomplish a QA, Do we share the solution with the entire team, with specific individuals or so forth? And then going into change requests. How do we accommodate the change requests? Do we have some sort of support email that they come through to? Do we have an app where the clients can log change requests? Do we have a UAT change request app that's embedded into the solution and so forth? And then lastly, how we manage our releases. How do we deploy from A to Z? How we deploy from internal environments to external environments? All these play a role within our ALM governance, and this is what we kind of need to consider when building our ALM governance, because you can see they all work together. Some really nice existing tools out there to help you get started with it is the COE Starter Kit. It consists of almost everything that you need, starting with your admin apps to share your flows and your applications to various users, your template apps to allow you to store component libraries, different templates, different theme brandings, etc. Admin apps to govern all your environment variables and to see where your apps are holding in terms of they not being used, who created them, and manage your environments accordingly. And you can also, they've also released an innovation app where you can have users submit ideas for different solutions that they feel that they need and prioritize which ones come first, which is your resource management. Another big one is Matthew Devaney's development standards document. He is a community leader who has actually designed a Power Apps development standards document for us to utilize. And again, it's a template, but it's a great starting point for you to actually look at and see, okay, well, he's identified we need these different aspects within our standards. How do we make this work for us? How do we make this suit our company requirements? Looking at Azure DevOps, doesn't have to be DevOps. I like DevOps. It can be GitHub, it can be Atlassian, it can be any other sort of DevOps source control that you need. But it's also a great tool because you can utilize your projects within DevOps. You can run your pipelines, you can run your Gantt charts, you can run your sprints, all of that stuff, your repositories. You can manage so much of your resource management within Azure DevOps. Within your QA review side, Microsoft on their GitHub repository have got a tool by Rajiv Penjala, which allows you to review your Power App code. And it is a Pro Code component, so when you do import it into your environment, you need to actually enable Pro Code. But it allows you to go through every single control on every single page within your solution and review delegation warnings, errors, and actually view the code through the solution as well, so you can identify where the issues are, and you can even flag them against certain criteria that will then notify the specific user. Something that I've been working on, which I'm going to hopefully release in the coming days, is a quality assurance assessment app that actually integrates with the Power Platform Pipelines preview feature at the moment, and will hopefully also integrate with the ALM Accelerator that allows you to pull all solutions that have been deployed to a QA environment and allows you to create a QA checklist that you can assign to specific categories and undergo QA processes for those specific those solutions when you notify the appropriate people and so forth. And lastly, we've got our Power Platform Pipelines ALM Accelerator by the PowerCat team, which allows us to deploy our solutions already through deployment pipelines from point A to point B in a structured manner, ensuring that we've got stable version control and we've got copies of our artifact either in Dataverse as a zip file or within our repositories in Azure DevOps through the ALM Accelerator. So those are really great tools to get started with. I highly recommend them. And here are a few screenshots, not screenshots, some QR codes of where you can find these three tools for now. If you have any issues, feel free to shout out and maybe we can assist on them. So take a quick second to have a look at that. And done. So that is my presentation on ALM governance, how we can start building our governance framework within Power Platform. If you have any questions, as I said, I'm not available on chat at the moment, but scan my QR code. Feel free to give me a shout on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I love engaging with the community. We all learn from each other. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed and enjoy the rest of the Global Bootcamp. Cheers.